Shalom and welcome to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles.
So the Psalms range, I will say that the Psalms range in age from 1,000 to about 500 BCE. Okay? We know that there are Psalms that were written after the return to Jerusalem in the Persian period. And that's roughly 500. They talk about rebuilding Jerusalem at that point. So, and other ones are very old from the language, content, and so forth. But it's not always relevant. Sometimes it's important, but sometimes it isn't. Because we're really going to look at content, language, structure, and actually the whole purpose of this is to help you understand that by looking in depth at the structure of the psalm, and you can even get this from the translation, because at least you'll understand how themes and words are going to interrelate. Obviously, if you can read the Hebrew, but the other thing you got to do is also just, when the Hebrew is read, listen to it, because sometimes you will hear sounds that even though you may not be able to understand, the sounds will be similar. This word will sound like that word. This sequence of words will sound like that sequence of words. Do you understand what I'm saying? So if you hear that, right, you understand then that there's something structural, something poetic that's going on in the Psalms. Okay. Remember, the Psalms are poetry. Okay. One of the basic structural elements of biblical poetry is what's called parallelism. Right? A phrase or a sentence will be divided into two parts, part A and part B. And they will either, they can be where the theme is repeated in slightly different language. It can be where the second part contradicts the first part, or it can be where the second part adds something to the first part. So there's three different ways that can work. But if you listen to the rhythms, because there are rhythms based upon the number of syllables or words, you can hear the poetry. So you got to keep in mind we're reading poetry here. And that's important to understand what it's saying. They're poets. Poets are not always what you would call, court recorders, where they write down all the details exactly as they were said. They take liberty, right? And these psalms are written that way. So you can't understand it as being like a law code, which seeks, precision in one way or another. This is art, okay? The fact is, and some of you who've studied some prayers with me, you've heard me say this, some prayers that seem to be narrative are actually poetic. There are many prayers in the Siddur where you've got segments that literally are mini poems in the middle of the prayer. Okay, so the impact, and you have many prayers that are structured, and they're not intended to be poems, but they're structured like a poem with a two-part sentence. So the influence of the book of Psalms, not only on ideology, but even on literature, has been very profound. Okay? So this is all by way of introduction. I'm not in this instance trying to play around and figure exactly what century a psalm was written. I want you to understand the ideas and the way we get the ideas from the language itself and from the structure. Okay, so now we're going to begin with Psalm 8. The first thing I want you to do is spend a few minutes and read it over. Whether you read the Hebrew or the English or both, or you want to go back and forth, I'll give you time. First, read it over and just get the sense of what it is trying to get across, okay? So do that now. All right. So now let's just look at the very beginning, the very first phrase. It's actually the first sentence. Lamatseach al Gitit mizmor leDavid. For the leader on the Gitit, a psalm of David. So here right away you see that it is presumed to have been written by David. By the way, why was David known as a singer of psalms? Why Dapka David? He's the only king that's associated with this.
Because he was a musician earlier?
He was a musician, right? If you read the book of Samuel, right, and as a youth into his, I don't know how old he was. Remember, he was the guy who was brought in to calm King Saul down when he would go into his fits of anger, right? And he played the harp. So he was a musician. So that's why Psalms are associated with him. I mean, I can't remember the names, but there are a number of Mesopotamian rulers who were known to have been poets. Okay. And you can study history and you'll find throughout history there have been kings who were very musical, kings who wrote poetry. And so it's not an impossibility that David could have written a number of these Psalms. Absolutely. Okay.
Scholars think he did.
Yeah, some of them, but it's hard to know which ones. It's hard to know. Okay.
Rabbi, was the Gittit like a harp? Or
yeah, well, that's
know what it was?
Question. Nobody knows. The assumption that many contemporary and even some traditional scholars have, some of the medievalists, that it was an instrument that was played in the town of Gat, which was actually a Phoenician town in biblical times. Goliath came from the town of Gat. So it's really ironic that you have David playing an instrument that was invented in the town of Gat by Phoenicians when he will eventually come in contact and, face to face with one of the great Gitti warriors, Goliath. And of course, as we know, kill him. So who knows? But everybody assumes it's some kind of an instrument. Okay, so a menatzeach, if I'm not mistaken today, a conductor is called a menatzeach, a conductor of an orchestra. So that term is still in use. Okay, now look at the second line. The second line actually has two separate statements in it, but they're separate, but they're connected, okay? And you'll see this is an instance where you find that the second one actually adds something to the first. So, Adonai Adonenu ma'adir shimcha b'chol ha'aretz. O Lord, our Lord, how majestic is your name in all the earth. Okay? Now, look at the words, okay? Now, obviously, when the psalm was written, what we use as Adonai for God's name was not necessarily in use. So we can't include that in what I'm about to say. Because that, when you see a hey there or something like that, or two yuds, it's an abbreviation for the four-letter name of God, okay, which is not Adonai. And in case you don't know it, that's the fact. We don't know how to pronounce God's name. We're not supposed to pronounce God's name. So the rabbis substituted, and maybe even pre-rabbinic, the term Adonai for it. Those of you who read Torah or Haftarot will know what I'm talking about, because there's some times when you have, Adonai, and in God's name, the traditional reading is Adonai Elohim. So the formal name of God, the four-letter name of God, Yud He Vav He, right, is in that instance, we're told by the vocalization, read it as Elohim. Then you have Adonai Elohim. Okay. Anyway. But so forget about the Adonai here. It's a Hebrew word that begins with a y sound, a y sound. But listen here, Adonenu ma'adir b'chol ha'aretz. You've got olives, right? Adonenu adir ba'aretz. The repetition of the sound. Keep in mind poetry here. All right, so you got to look for things like that, and it's very often in these poems it's not incidental, right? It's not simply that those are the words that were available. They're intentional, okay? Now, adir means strong or majestic, okay? So how powerful, how majestic is your name in all the earth. So it begins with a statement about God and God's relationship to the earth. But look at the second half. Asher tna hodcha ala shamayim. You whose splendor is set above the heavens. Right? So this tells us about God. Where is God's power and presence reflected? Where do we sense it? Where do we see it? Where do we feel it? In the earth and in the heavens, right? So this is a universal God, right? This is the God of Genesis chapter 1, creator of heaven and earth, right? Okay, I see your hand, Bart. Just a second, okay? Bert, okay, hold on. All right, but now I want you to go down to the last line and look at it.
Same thing, no heavens.
What?
Same thing, but no heavens.
Right. But look, but what is it creating? It's called an inclusio, a structure that includes, that designates this is the beginning and the end of this, often called a frame. Okay, so this psalm is framed by a repetition of the same words. All right, and you're going to see as we go through the psalm that there's going to be a shift from earthly to heavenly in the course of the psalm, or actually heavenly to earthly, right? Which is interesting because in verse 2, the heavens are the earth rather is mentioned before the heavens. Look at verse 2. The reference to the earth before the heavens. Right? Okay. But it's set up this way to create the frame. Now, very often when you have a frame like this, it's an indication this is something that's important, right? You think when you put a photograph in a frame, why do you do it? What are you going to do with it? If you frame it, you're going to hang it on the wall.
Completeness.
Why are you going to hang? It's completeness. But why are you going to hang it on the wall?
So you can see it.
You can see it because it's meaningful to you. It's got some sort of power to it, some significance. So very often when you see a biblical passage that has a frame around it, it's a sign that, think of a neon sign on the outside of something very important, flashing, blink, 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 okay? That's what this serves as. Okay, so this is significant here. It's exceptionally significant. Okay, Bart.
Can you
call you Bart?
I don't know.
I don't know.
That's okay. You can call me anything you want, Rabbi.
Sounds more cowboyish. Bart.
Yeah, okay.
Bart Klein.
Yeah. I've had trouble understanding what the English word name has in this context. I wonder if you could talk about the translation of
yes, okay.
Its name.
Right.
I mean, it's not the label. It's not God's name in that sense.
Remember this. Name means religious divine power. The book of Deuteronomy, some of you have studied this with me. In the book of Deuteronomy, how, with respect to God's presence, okay, both deal with the laws of the sanctuary, right? And sacrifices to one degree or another, and festivals, yes? Temple, sanctuary related things. Okay. How is the book of Deuteronomy radically different from those kinds of references in all the other books of the Torah?
Jerusalem is the center.
Well, none of the books of the Torah refer to Jerusalem.
No, but it has one place as opposed to Bamakom Asher Yibchar, the place where he will ultimately choose.
All right. So in Deuteronomy says it's only Jerusalem. That's only the one place. So that's one way that the Jerusalem center is different. In the other ones, we know that there were other places where there were multiple places where Israelites worshipped. Okay. And the statement is clear. Genesis chapter 12, you may only go to that one place and you may only offer sacrifices in that one place. All right. So that's one. Very good. What else? How else is the Jerusalem center different? When you read of the sanctuary in the other books of the Torah, what is it that is there that represents God? What is it called?
The ark?
The what?
The Mishkan?
Oh, the ark.
In the Mishkan. What's in the Mishkan?
The aroma?
The tablet.
Well, no, the tablets and the Aron, yeah, but what is it that there is a divine
presence, the presence of God.
Right. The rabbis called it the Shekhinah, right? Mm-hmm. Okay. Some spiritual presence, the cloud, that which the high priest cannot see. Yom Kippur, when all the smoke is billowing up and he goes in, because if you look at it, you're going to die. Right? So there is something there. Right? What does it say in the book of Deuteronomy? There's no mention of a presence. It says, Bamakom asher samti et shmi, the place where I cause my name to be, where I place my name, God's name in some way, which we do not know for sure. God's name is in the sanctuary, not God's presence. In Deuteronomy, the divine presence is in the heavens above. Okay? And for example, when the Torah is given, it doesn't say that God's presence, a cloud came down on the mountain, that God's presence came down on the mountain. It doesn't say that. The voice comes from the fire, but it nowhere says that God descended. So the fire on the mountain is like a broadcasting station where God is at the station up in heaven. He's got a loudspeaker plugged in. This is in Deuteronomy, right? In that fire, and the voice comes out, but the presence is up. Okay, my point here is then that the shame, this is getting back to that question, Bert. The shame is associated with divine presence and power. It's a kind of a surrogate. But it was believed that the name had power. That's why we can't use it.
It's always struck me, though, that the English word name is a bad translation. I don't know that it really expresses what you were just saying.
No, it doesn't. But the fact the closest you can get, because a shame is a name.
Yeah.
Identifier. It's an identifier. So you can say from the Deuteronomic perspective, it's an identifying factor that's there in lieu of God. It's amorphous. It may be intentional, what you're saying. We can't grasp it, especially with respect to God. Are we expected to understand everything about God? No.
A question, does name have any meaning without human beings? Because it always struck me that name is a connecting thing, a way that human beings connect with God. God doesn't need a name.
But God has a name, Yud-He Vav-He.
God has many names.
Yeah, but God's personal name is Yud-He Vav-He.
Isn't that for us?
I don't know.
It's written down. Written down in the Torah. I mean, it just name to me always was like a human connection to God.
When Moses asks, "What's God's name?" Remember?
Right.
What does God say?
I'll be whatever I am.
All right. Yeah, sure. And he says, "Tell him Ehyeh sent you." Okay. So it means that God is defining God's self with a name that has to do with existence. If you look at the four-letter name of God, it has to do with existence. I'm of the school that says it's got three, Hayah, Hoveh, and Yehyeh, right? Was, is, and will. That's eternity. Rabbi David Aronson of blessed memory used to use, when he talked about God, he would say the eternal. And I think that's the best translation I can find for the four-letter name of God. So it is amorphous, right? That's a grammatical statement, or it's a chronological, but it's beyond our comprehension. So the fact that you and I can't understand what the name really means, maybe that's the way it's intended to be.
Rabbi?
Wait, Joel's hand was up first. Hold on, just a second.
I just wanted to reference the very end of the Aleinu that we all sing together. Vayom hahu yeh Adonai echad u'shemo echad. And what we're supposed to get from that God will be one and his name will be one. It's similar to...
Yeah, it's a very, right. That is I think what it means the expressions of what God represents will be unified. In other words, there will be a cohesiveness to the comprehension of God that heretofore has been lacking.
Okay, that's good.
I mean, and when you consider that idolatry, taking my Bible 101 class, it starts tomorrow. Those of you who've taken it, you know what I'm talking about. Idolatry continued to be a real issue in the Israelite community down to the destruction of the first temple, continuously. And the prophets say so. Jeremiah and Ezekiel, right, are the last prophets before the destruction. They say so over and over again. They're telling the truth. So the problem was, and that's a diffusion of it, right? When you say it's all unified, means every aspect of our faith in God will be unified. But what does that mean? I have a feeling that a lot of things that we take for granted are ways of expressing that ultimately our little brains cannot comprehend the fullness of what God is about, and we have to live with that reality. You know, there is a statement in the Talmud: if I understood God, I would be He. Keep that in mind. Yes.
I was just going to put in what Rashi says.
Hey, Ian, you talking?
Yes. Can't you hear me?
I didn't see your mouth moving. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to mention what Rashi says, which I think complicates it. How mighty is your name? And more than the strength of the measure of earthlings, the earthlings did not deserve that you should cause your Shekhinah to rest upon them, which connects name to Shekhinah. And
but that's Rashi.
Yes.
That's not Deuteronomy.
That is not Deuteronomy. That's Rashi.
Right. Yeah, of course. Well, so that's the unification you're talking about. Yeah, right, exactly. But, I mean, we could go on about this. I want to move off of it. But read the Bible. It's clear that the amorphous concept of what God is something that humanity has been trying to figure out ever since they came up with the concept of a single God. Much easier if you're a pagan, right? Because say, this is this, this is this, this is this. I see it, I touch it. Easy, right?
Or a Catholic.
Caters to all your senses. So what do you do with the God? We're going to, when God calls God's self Elohim, read Genesis chapter 1, read the Bible. Whenever Elohim is used, talking about God, the verbs are all singular. Elohim is a plural form. Go explain it. I have an explanation. I'm not going to deal with it right now. It's not our topic. But yeah, go explain it. All right, moving on. Okay, but here now you've got to look at this. Getting back to the to verse 2, because we got a lot to cover here. So your glory, your splendor is above the heavens. So he's down on earth and he's above the heavens, even above the heavens. What does that mean? Above the heavens.
That's a good question. That's my question.
Okay.
I've never considered that to be physical.
There are multiple
metaphysical.
heavens. No, I mean if you read Bible scholarship, you'll see this. They talk about it. The Shamayim that God created in Genesis 1 was made out of the rakia, the firmament. That's where God placed the sun, the moon, and the stars. And in that particular view of the universe, the firmament was intended for one purpose, in addition to hanging the stars there. What was the other purpose? To keep the water above from inundating down below so that you could reveal the earth, right? In Genesis chapter 9, when the heavens open, no, it's not 9, 6. When the heavens open, what does it say? The sluices in heavens opened. God opened the trapdoors. So what came out? All the water that was stored up there, came out. And you had a mabul. Okay? So that was the heaven. Where's God? Vashamayim mima'al. talking about Aleinu, in heaven above everything. God and the angels lived in a totally spiritual place somewhere out there. So there were multiple heavens. Okay, so when it says here he's above, this is a kind of a biblical statement that would reinforce that notion of what heavens are. God's presence, he's above it all. That's what it says, right? Al hashamayim, not mitachat lashamayim, not below. Okay, so that's what it is. So this opens up now. Look, I'm going to get back to verse 3 in a minute because that's a real challenging one. But look at verse 4 in particular. What does it say? What's verse talking about? Again, the heaven, right? When I see your heavens, the work of your fingers, why does it say, well, look, hold on. What does he see?
The moon, the stars.
And the stars, right? That you set in place. All right? I mean, this is a reaction we all have. Yes? Have you seen the Milky Way? Have you laid down on the side of a hill and looked up at the sky when the Milky Way was out and you saw all those gazillions of stars, those little lights up there, with an occasional meteor coming through, falling stars, a moon? But better off a crescent moon, because if it's a full moon, it blots out a lot of the stars. The glare is too bright. You know what I'm talking about, yeah?
Mm-hmm.
And you say, there's God, right? I mean, you look at there, that's where God is. Yeah? Well, this is saying God is really above it all. But this is what God created. But why does it say your fingers? Usually you talk about hands. Granted, this is a metaphor. We know that. God doesn't have fingers and hands. At least not the standard God in which we believe. Okay? So why does it say fingers? Yeah, there it is. Have you thought about it?
Creation, maybe referring to creation.
Well, yeah, but creation could be hands, right? There's more.
God is so great. God is so great that he doesn't even need to use a hand. He can just use a finger to create something.
Possibly. But
could it be that 10 is already an enormously symbolically significant number? So fingers are, in fact, a way of alluding to 10.
It's possible, but here it doesn't say 10. It just says fingers, okay? Yeah, but I understand. It could be looking at the hands, the fingers. We use fingers for different things, and they're important. Yes. Okay, Mike Harris.
Yes, fingers, because fingers are ideal for detailed, precise work.
Exactly. I happen to agree with that interpretation. Yes. You think about it. I see your hand. Okay, just a second. You think about it. You're looking at tiny little things here now, right? You're not looking at full round globes. I mean, the moon itself is a product of very delicate movement, isn't it? Right? If you look at it when it's a new moon, it's a little tiny sliver, right? Then it gets bigger and bigger, and then it gets smaller and smaller. So you need to have a hand that can expand and contract. And the fingers are part of that, important part of that. But details, yes. Good. Okay, Rick.
Hi. In the Exodus story, the Egyptians, when they're seeing one of the plagues, they say, Ze etzba Elohim, this is the finger of God. So that's the only other, we don't like to anthropomorphize God, but that's one phrase that comes to mind about the finger doing the plagues. So it's
good. But there too, it's a very delicate thing. Wasn't that with lice?
Yes.
Little tiny thingies, right? Details. So I think that may be consistent with that, actually. Thank you. That's a good point. Yeah. So it's delicate work here, right? And so You know, I'm overwhelmed with this. But look, now, verses 4.
Put 4.
And, wait.
Okay.
Go ahead. Somebody want to say something?
Yes. Yes. Why can't you put 4 and 2 together? Because in 4 you say, I look up at the heavens and I am astounded by the splendor of it. And that's what 2 says. How majestic your name in all the earth, whose splendor was told over the heavens.
Exactly. Yes. That's exactly what he's doing. Okay. He's making, literally, you can say it's a kind of a movement from earth to heaven. Verse 3, earth to heaven, then earth, right? And it's an intentional bouncing back and forth.
Yeah.
Which again emphasizes the fact that God's involvement is in all of it, right? The universal power of God. But this is really interesting. Verse 3. Mipi olalim v'yonkim yisadata oz laman sorech lahashbit oyev umitnakem. From the mouths of infants and sucklings you have founded strength because of your foes to put an end to enemy and avenger. What does from the mouths of infants and sucklings have to do with founding strength that defeats enemies? Vered.
Okay. So it again?
Huh? No. Did you raise your hand?
I did.
Okay.
So I want to talk about the word mipi.
Yes.
Mipi olalim veyonkim isadeta oz. So we can talk about mipi in 2 different ways. Depends what do we like. So number 1, we can say that the word mipi comes actually from the word pe, mouth. And so what is happening to toddlers, olalim, young babies, and yonkim are infants? What do? They know from the very beginning how to suck them with their mouth, the milk from their mother. From the very, very beginning, they know this act without anybody teaching them or doing. So we can say that here is the glory of God. Here is something that God is doing, something majestic, big, that babies that were born, they can immediately with their mouth suck the milk from their mother. So this is one interpretation that I know.
Yeah.
So olalim veyonkim are babies. Yonek is somebody that drinks the milk from his mother, and olal is a little bit older than just a born. Isadeta oz is strength, power. So here is how we can show your power in the world. That's explanation number 1. If we like to say that P relates to the word pe, which is the word pair in smichut for that word.
Yes.
Second interpretation for that word, mipi, can be related to the verb to tefillah. Okay, so but tefillah, I want to say, how would I relate it to tefillah? That this is a tefillah of young babies, young children. And we say that this tefillah of young children is actually very pure and comes from innocent babies, young children.
Yesher koach on both.
Thank you.
2 of the most frequently cited ones, because again, my dear friend Benji Siegel lists all 9 of the explanations. But those are the two very prominent ones, especially this notion of the purity, the sounds of a child. Vile words don't come from that mouth. Sounds, and sounds that are real, that express concern. When they're hungry, it's the sounds of crying. When they're happy, they gurgle, right? And as they get older, they start to smile, right? And so all of these sounds are driven by, innocent, totally innocent people. And out of that innocence and purity, what this is saying is that the strength that you need to defeat evil in the world must be grounded in the purity of a child's mouth. You can't ground it on evil. If you want to rid the world of evil, it has to emerge from a foundation of goodness.
Well, I just want to add that if we understand this way, then the continuation of this pasuk, it just goes, Yisadeta Oz, you have this strength and power.
But you've made a yasod. This is the foundation of this. Exactly. Yes. It's an amazing statement. It's an amazing statement. And here it is, right there, right in front of you. Okay? There's anybody else want to add? Somebody else had a hand up, but did it go down? Maybe it went down. Oh, there. Okay. Janet.
Yeah. So I was thinking more things that are related to confidence. So when a baby suckles, it's comfort, and this is something that from the beginning could create confidence that later could be used as a strength to fight enemies. Is that as if from the beginning we give this confidence to our children, they grow to become strong and face evil reality.
But I just want to ask you to clarify what is the mouth of babies that are suckling at their mother's breast? Where does how does the implanting of confidence emerge there?
Well, the comfort. Comfort and giving of the mother to.
No. I want to pick up on it. Can I give it a little twist?
Okay.
Because it just struck me. When a baby cries out for milk, right, to suckle, to get the motion moving, right, which is instinctive. It's part of what the baby's born with. That baby is strong. That baby's not going to shut up until you let him do it. It's a statement of of survival, right? Of this is what I need to survive. I have the strength to keep me to help me survive. And the beauty of it is it's a totally positive thing, right? It's good for him, and it gives the mother great relief. Look, I'm not a mother, but we have 4 kids, and Freddie breastfed all 4 of them. And I know how relieved and happy she was. Happy as the kids were when they did their job, okay? So the point is, it's the strength, and it's ironic that there's strength in this demand that the child has for this sustenance, this good thing, this powerfully good thing. And if you can draw upon that innate strength in the child and help the child develop it in a positive way, the same way that there's a positive, that the sucking milk is a positive action, you can defeat enemies because you have this strength that is based upon a solid foundation of goodness. Bert.
I don't understand the Hebrew. My Hebrew is not good enough. But looking at the English, is it possible that this really means the whole life? And from, in this case, means starting with? So it's saying that God, even from the time of a baby onward, you're giving strength to humans to confront the enemy.
In a sense, it's what you're saying, but it doesn't focus on the extension. Because as Barrett said, Olalim v'yonkim are little tiny babies. So this is the very beginning of the process.
Right, but that this is saying that all the way through life, from the very beginning, God is giving human beings the strength that ultimately will be able to defeat the enemy.
Well, no, but this is saying this is the foundation of that strength.
Right, the beginning of it.
Right, no, but Yesod is really, it's like laying a foundation upon which the strength can be built. That's what.
Right, as the baby grows up, that was really
right. But it's focusing on that moment in the child's life. There's no sense of extension. That's the amazing thing. If it were that, I think we would have thought initially that there would have been some extension. But the striking thing is that it's not. And Olel and Yonek both focus on that early stage of childhood. That's the irony here. It's mentioned these two words, right? So this is the foundational thing here on the basis of which you have the strength to be able to stand up to your enemies. And by the way, notice when you use the word oyev, right? And mitnakem, somebody who's an avenger, right? Those are the opposites of what the child represents.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
Right? And so this is the antithesis of that. You can remove that kind of evil through the results of the purity and goodness of the beginning. Okay. Rick.
Hi. So if we pull back and imagine the audience listening to this, the mothers of the audience who have their babies with them, it's also a great diatribe against those other religions that would do child sacrifice and were perfectly willing to kill their kids to do their religious stuff. So this is so beautiful here that the strength that we get from starting with the babies and keeping them alive. I thank you for bringing that out. This is the clearest thing I've seen in a long time about how it's important for kids to be around, you know?
Yes, exactly. And I can tell you, in the Greco-Roman world, it was not unusual for parents to expose their kids if there was an unwanted child. They just leave them outside, let them die.
Yeah.
And the Jews never did that. And that was one of the ways that Gentiles, pagans, would distinguish themselves. They would say, look at those stupid people. They save their babies.
Yeah.
And this is making that exact point. You better believe we save our babies because that's our future. You know? Anyway, yeah, good. Okay. All right. So this is earthly, yes? And it's then you have verse 4, right? With the sun, the moon, the stars, the glory. But verse 4 continues with verse 5. I mean, it leads into it, right? You'll see that. We'll get to it. Ma enosh kitis karenu uben adam kiti pkedenu. Now it's going back on the question. It's almost a question to verse number 3. Right? What is a person? What is a human that you remember, that you're aware of, that you remember them, and a human that you pay heed to him, you take notice of him. Why are humans so important? Right? Well, it's almost a question having set forth verse 3, right? In verse 3, you say, it's very important that there be little humans because they can create a foundation of strength. But then on verse 5, it says, but still, why do you care so much about human beings? Okay, maybe that's a continuation of that. It's a rhetorical question.
But is it a continuation of the sun and the stars and this magnificent nature, and we're just these puny little people?
Right, exactly, right, exactly. But it's in a sense, though, also keeping in mind what verse 3 said. because it said you need this foundation. Okay, fine. Yeah, but still, yeah, it's like the author is throwing in, yeah, but when I see the heavens, what are these people? How can we stack up to that?
This isn't Yisro, isn't it?
They're important. I'll grant you. But, when I look up at the heavens, why are you so concerned about us? Okay, that's what this is saying, yeah? Why are you concerned? By the way, I want to show you something, though. Listen to the words, going back to verse 3. Mipi olalim v'yonkim. Okay? And then they are the answer to oyev umitnakem.
And so
look at the word yonkim. Nun kuf mem.
Right.
The word mitnakem. Nun kuf mem. Look at the word olalim that begins with a O sound. Oyev begins with an O. There's poetry here. There's alliteration, assonance. Okay,
and there's rhyme. It rhymes too. Tis karenu rhymes with tif kadena.
Yes.
Hebrew doesn't usually rhyme.
Well, you'd be surprised though how much rhyming exists in the poetic structure. There is, absolutely, and you can see this in many of the prayers, where there are a whole sequence of words will have the same ending. Okay, so it's used. Right. It's not used as rigorously as in some of the poetry that we know. But modern poetry does not necessarily include rhymes. Okay, I got Tybal, and then I have Leon.
Just a fast one, because you said that the book has all sorts of other literary allusions. Does he talk about the Hamlet?
What?
Does he talk about Hamlet in the context of verse 5?
Hamlet?
Yeah, there's a famous "What is man?"
Oh.
Hamlet.
That. Oh. Ooh. I didn't see it. Wait a minute. No, I don't think so. No. That's a good one. That's a good one. Good. Yeah. Very good.
What a piece of work is man, right? How noble in reason. Yeah.
Good. Very good. Okay. All right. Leon.
Well, there is, at least in my Hebrew, there is a bar between olalim v'yonkim, okay, which is kind of a separation. And then you have the oyev umitnakem. And so there is kind of an opposition between the two. And that matches what Rashi says at olalim, in which he quotes Job as saying that, it is part of the way... let me just get it. In 16:15 of Job, I sewed sackcloth over my skin and I buried my glory in the dust. Sak tafarti alai, gildi olalti be'afar karni. And Rashi's position is that it shows that the priests come from babies which are usually dirty, okay? That they're pure but dirty, and that it is the priests' prayers to God that are important and the reason for the importance of man.
Okay. Thank you, Rashi. He's very creative, Look, he loves to look at words.
Yes. I'm sorry, I'm kind of glued to him usually when I read that.
It's okay. All right. So, and yes, somebody mentioned the poetry here. Maya nosh ki tizkarenu v'nadam ki tifkedenu, right? Tizkarenu, tifkedenu, absolutely. Okay. Now, v'tachasrehu me'at me'elohim v'chavod v'hadar ta'atrehu, right? You made him little less than Elohim and adorned him with honor and glory. Okay, now.
First word, last word rhymes.
Asrehu ta'atrehu. Good. Now you're talking poetry. Good. Right. And by the way, you see, v'techasrehu me'at me'elohim, pause, v'chavod v'hadar te'atrehu. Okay, good.
But it's ABBA, right?
In a sense.
Kind of.
This is an internal framing. Techasrehu te'atrehu, right? Which is interesting, by the way. Techasrehu means you've made him less, but when you crown him, you make him taller.
Uh-huh.
So there's absolute opposite at work here. Poetry. Beautiful. But what does Elohim mean? You've made him a little less than what?
My book says angels.
Yeah, many books say angels. Okay?
This is the art scroll.
G. Siegel says God.
Yeah?
A little less than God. I want to offer a third option.
Yeah?
The notion of sub-gods. In other words, there were, in Israelite tradition, when pagan notions were floating around, whether they actually express themselves in the form of how temples were set up. So, I was at a temple, a mini temple in Arad, remember, where there are two gods. There are two clearly expressions. There are two standing stones, and in front of them are two incense altars.
The one we pray to and then we don't want to pray to? Like the island with the two synagogues?
No. Same Holy of Holies. I got you on that one. They're in the same Kodesh HaKodeshim, in this mini temple, in a fortress, which is Israelite.
And then the two Keravim.
No.
No, but I mean, I know it's not the same, but there's the two facing each other, no?
It's God and God's consort.
Oh.
Mr. and Mrs. God. That's what it is. And there are references in written words in other places that have been found which speak of Hashem and his Ve'asherato, his female.
Mm-hmm.
So Mr. and Mrs. God, which means multiple gods. There is one such temple. I just had balloons fly over. Northern Israel, where there are 5 gods, one big one and smaller ones, a pantheon. And so it's very possible that the poet here has in his mind the notion of these sub-gods who dwell in the same realm of God, but are lower. And the realm, and actually what it really means then, it's not specifically, I see your hand, AJ, just a second. It's not specifically referring to any god or gods, but it's sort of referring to the court of God, though the denizens, whoever they might be, right? The divine palace, right? And we humans are just a cut below that level of divinity. Maybe a better word would be Elohut rather than Elohim, but it says Elohim. But I'm suggesting that it's a poetic carryover of this notion of a pantheon of gods called henotheism, where you have a leading god and then sub-gods. And so for numbers of Israelites, we don't know what the proportions were, Hashem, Yud-He-Vav-He, was the boss. And these were his courtiers, his number twos, part of the divinity, but lower than God. And we are just a cut below them. The angels are another expression of that. And yes, angels can be on earth expressions of the divine presence. So it could be angels. It's not, I'm saying it could be. It could be, but then he could use the term malachim. That was a term that was widely in use. Not a strange term. Okay? So it's hard to know. And it may be an obscurity that was intentionally put in there because, once again, we're dealing with a realm of existence that is unknown to us because we haven't been there yet. And at least as far as we know, nobody's been and come back. So, okay, AJ. Okay.
Regarding the 5 that you mentioned, the archaeological find with the 5, one of the theories is that is actually the standing stones, standing upright, the one large and then the 4 smaller, is actually a foot of God or a footprint. And one of the non-Jewish temples that features one of the features of an archaeological find was an entry with a giant footprint. So a lot of times when they see these stones standing upright with a large stone and then smaller stones by it, so that it's the toes on the foot of the god, whatever god that is. How that correlates to God, to Adonai and his consort, they may be two very different things there, because you did have the issue of the consort of Hashem being represented as a tree of life. There's no accident that we call Torah tree of life, but you will see the tree of life theme being gradually in art and craftsmanship being simplified over centuries, over millennia, and ultimately becoming simply a pole at the front of the temple.
Right. Well, but
and ultimately in Deuteronomy being prohibited.
Right. But I would argue that notion of the foot of God is, you've got to show me where that's found in biblical expressions.
We're not talking about, in this case, the 5 standing stones are found in non-Jewish archaeological sites.
No, but that was seen as the one I'm talking about is an Israelite site.
And it's very possible that, depending on the date of it, that they may simply be, because our temples were structured, the first temple was structured very similarly to non-Jewish temples. They may very well have been influenced in other ways as well.
Right, but the point is, you have to demonstrate. We know that the existence of multiple deities did exist. In the Arad is one example of that. But this notion of God and the Asherah is something that we find in Hebrew, ancient Hebrew statements that relate to the worship. Okay, so
that's why I'm making a distinction between those two.
Yeah, well, the sources that I look at who specialize in this are arguing that 5 is actually an Israelite site, and that it may have been something they borrowed from the pagans, but if so, but that in its context there, it's set up in a way that would indicate that it is not used to represent a foot, but rather to represent the divine and the divine court. That's the argument that they make.
So multiple, not just Hashem and consort, but multiple gods,
right.
Not demigods, demigods, but actual, not unlike the Titans or the Olympians.
No, I'm not saying demigods in the sense that they are gods, but they're just they're subordinate gods. In other words, henotheistic concepts, the one God is the powerful and the ruler, and these are his lieutenant gods. That's what I'm saying, sub-gods. So they are of a divine nature, but their power and status is that of a secondary deity. And it's interesting to note, by the way, that in the Arad temple, the second god, both the stone and the size of the incense altar are both smaller than that of the large one. So clearly the size, it's a matter of status within the royal court. Okay, Barbara, and then Leon.
Well, when you were talking about the gods under the god, or a prime god, it sounded to me like many years ago after you came back from studying Kabbalah, you taught us about the 10 levels with Shekhinah just under and on the two sides. I can't remember all the names, but I just remember that starting with a single at the bottom and then four and then one at the top, which was God, if I remember correctly.
Close, right. Yeah, and of course it's an indirect spin-off of something like this, but there's a big difference. Within the context of the Zohar, the Sefirot are not seen as entities that are independent. It's a lower expression of God. It's the same God, and the one book of the one segment of the Zohar that really expresses this in its most developed way. Always there, every so often is a random sentence, but they are one. All is one is one. That they are a unification. Okay, so it's as if it is the same power source of spiritual power, but with reduced levels, shall we say, of intensity. I just made that up. Okay, but something like that. But it also deals with the personification of powers within the one God, right?
Yeah, right. That's what I thought.
Of divine attributes, right?
That's what I thought.
It's the hierarchy of attributes. The problem, of course, is that the Zohar personifies them, and it makes it sound very overly anthropomorphic. Okay, that's the confusing thing here. Yeah, but at the same time, if you go back to the pagan thinking of the second and third century of the Common Era in Eretz Yisrael, and there were these Gnostic systems that had this notion of semi-gods, lower-level gods, independent entities, right? That are not part of that were part of the structure, but had their own, they were distinct. And the interesting thing is, in one of the traditions of the Zohar, evil comes into the world because one of the Sefirot decides on its own to try to do something, expression of its power. And it wasn't authorized. And as a result, evil came into the world. And it flows out of that. And that's very similar to a Gnostic notion that comes from like the 4th or 5th century of Common Era, very old, where one of the entities on her own wants to create rather than dealing with the pair, because there's usually male and female. So she on her own arrogated unto herself the authority to create, and out came the evil. Very similar. So you can see the continuity of history here, but it changed, right? But in a sense, the fact that pagan concepts or details were sort of reformulated. This the Bible does all the time. The Bible does all the time, right? El Elyon, right? Bible calls God El Elyon. We use it in the Amidah, right? Well, that was the term that was used for the God El of the elevated God El, the Father of the gods, pagan. It's a term. They adapted it. It's called repurposing. We repurposed pagan things. We stripped them of their paganism and just kept whatever. That's what the Bible does. That's not Cultures do that. That's what happened. Okay, was there another hand? I want to finish this up. Okay, yeah, Leon.
I'll try to be short. There are two passages, one in our prayers and one in the Bible, that specifically talk about this. Just before Noah, you have Anshe Hashem, the children of the gods.
Oh, yes, of course.
The daughters of man. And then in our Amidah,
yeah,
in the Kedusha, we have Chayot HaKodesh.
Right, but those are the angels. The Chayot HaKodesh are the angels. It's a term for the Chayot are not gods. They're not. They're for example, you have in Yechezkel Perek Aleph the angels that support that carry the chariot have four-headed. Their heads have four faces. Okay, and these are the Chayot HaKodesh. Okay, what are the four faces? A human, a lion, an eagle, and an ox. This is Ezekiel chapter 1. Okay, each one represents the power of the species. The human is the most powerful, right? Lion is the most powerful of the four-legged animals, and the wild four-legged animals. The eagle is the most powerful bird, and the ox is the most powerful of the domesticated four-legged animals. Okay, so those are Chayot HaKodesh, because they are Chayot. Okay, so they're not gods, they're servants, they're angels. Okay, now, what do we learn about this human being? Verse 7. Tamshilehu b'ma'asei yadecha kol shata tachat raglav. Okay, you have made him ruler, master. Okay, limshol means to rule. B'ma'asei yadecha, of your the things that your hands produced. We had Maaseh before up in verse 4, but there was God's Maaseh Etzba'ot. Now it's the human's Maaseh Yad. Those things, no, sorry, it's God's hand. It's still, this is Maaseh Yadecha. So he put us in charge of those things that God made, the creatures down here. In other words, these are the creatures of God's hands. Right? The stars, the little delicate stars, that's the fingers, right? Because they're so delicate. I mean, they didn't know how big they really were. They had no idea that those tiny little stars, were huge compared to the earth. But that doesn't matter. They looked small. All right. But here, it's normal creation, right? Right? You created whatever. God created the animals, right? His hands did that. You don't need fingers to create an ox that weighs, 1,000 pounds. You use your hands for that because you got big things. Yes. Okay. But here's the thing. Here again, looking at bodily things, kol shata tachat raglav, right? You have laid them all at the feet of the human. In other words, they are under our feet. That's a metaphor, under our control, under our power. So we have power, right? We have power, rule and power over God's other creatures. That's us. And who is that? Okay, verse 8. Sona, which is the same as tzon. It's a variant of the word for sheep. Tzon is tzadi, aleph, nun. I see your hand, Vera, just a second. Okay, alafim are oxen, right? Kulam v'gam bahamot sadai. All of them, so the domesticated and the wild beasts too. All of these creatures are under our control. And even more, sipor shamayim udegei hayam, the birds of the heaven and the fish of the seas, right? And whatever over orchot yamim, whatever paths that crosses the sea. Okay, maybe that's referring to dolphins, right? Who cross the sea, because you see them going on top of the water a lot. Okay? So all of these creatures are under the control of God. Okay? So the question is, why? Why have you given us this power? Well, the fact is, it says we have it. We may not understand why God gave it, or maybe we do. Okay, because it concludes, Adonai Adonenu ma'adir shemcha b'chol haaretz. How great is, how majestic is your name on the land. Who is it that allows, that sets the table for the expression of the majesty? It's the human being. The human being who controls all these things down here. We are the ones who can comprehend God. That's what this whole poem is about. We comprehend God's power. And we are the ones then that we are, by controlling the way the world operates, we are expressing that power down here. So Rabbi Ben Siegel makes the notion, he calls the psalm partnership. That ultimately what this is teaching is, and notice it ends with the reference to the land, not the heavens, at which where it began, right? The second part of verse 2. Heavens are gone. Once you get past verse 4, it's all earthbound. All earthbound. And who is the dominant creature on earth?
Us.
We are, the human. The human. In a sense, it's a reformulating of Genesis chapter 1. Because how does it end? Put this in the background. Genesis chapter 1. What's the conclusion of that? What's the final creature?
Man.
We're all Tov Ma'od.
The humans. Our presence allowed God to say Tov Ma'od. Right? And what is our responsibility? To rule.
To take care of all the above.
Exactly. Take care of what's down here.
I meant above in the list of creation of animals.
No. But it says, remember the Psalms. Hashamayim Shamayim Ladonai. Ha'aretz Shamayim Ladonai.
Ha'aretz
Land was given to the people. Psalm 15. Hallel, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's the point. So this is the divine plan then is, and that's what this is all about. Our responsibility, right? That's the real major point here. We have a huge responsibility because the stuff down here is in our hand. God made it, but we're the ones that he put in control.
Yep.
So it says this is a midrash on the first chapter of Genesis. I can't prove it. Okay. But it sounds like it.
I think you just did.
The wording grand. But the feel of it is. Okay. So amazing, isn't it? It's
yes.
Look here. Look at just an example. I see a hand. Verid, ask your question. I'll have one final point. Go ahead.
I don't have a question. I have two comments.
Okay.
Okay, number one, in Pasuk Vav, the last word in that Pasuk is teatreu.
Yes.
So you can translate it as crowning. Okay, keter atara is to crown. And then if we start and look at Pasuk Zayin, Tamshilehu, so you crown him. So there is like play on words, double vocabulary, like we say in poetry. That's one of another example, like the continuation, how it goes, different vocabulary.
Good.
And the other comment that I have is that the very last Pasuk Vav, Pasuk Yud, if we look at it, it's spaced a little bit away, like it's spaced differently. The lines are not together. In poetry, it's called Hatima.
Yeah, conclusion.
And the Hatima is like a conclusion, like you said. So it's like a summary. So what is the summary of this Tehillim? Adonai Eloheinu Ma'adir Shimcha. Also, in excellent literature and poetry, part of it, we call it Ma'agal Sagur. You start in one verse, one sentence, and you go a full circle, you explain what you want to say, and you end with the same sentence. So we see it exactly here in Pasuk Aleph, in Pasuk Bet, Adonai Eloheinu Ma'adir Shimcha, that is the Hatima, the conclusion of this Tehillim.
Right, exactly. No question, but that the fact that it's set up though here, it in biblical Hebrew very often when you find this, as I said at the outset, it's the way of showing by creating a frame. Zemashu chashuv me'od. It talks about
but it's beautiful in terms of what we are looking in a nice piece of literature. What are we looking for?
Yes, that's right.
So there's a lot of ample example here to show it.
Right, exactly.
Thank you.
Yes, good. But I think it's just wonderful when you hear, like I was just going to quickly point out, Tzipor Shamayim with the Gei Hayam over Yamim, right? The Yud Mem, Yud Mem, Yud Mem. I mean, again, you're going to say, well, what else is going to be? You could simply say, you didn't have to. You could say it's Tziporim with the Gei Hayam, but it's the repetition and the structuring of it incorporates these words that are together poetically. And the whole thing is just filled with this stuff.
Also, Pasuk Chet, it's the same thing. Son and Alapim and Behemot. So it is like you said, parallel. This is the parallel in the poetry.
Yes. So this is a good. I offer it to you as a very good example of a well-written, consciously put together passage that ultimately carries with it a very important message to the reader, who hopefully will be able to decipher it, if only simply by viewing the number of lines that relate to earthly activity as opposed to those which relate to heavenly activity. And the focus here is God is the creator of both, but God expects us to deal with the part where we live very carefully, with the power he gave us to maintain it, and to maintain it in a way that matches the glory of what we see when we see the order, that the natural law that exists in heaven exists down here as well. And by the way, there's another psalm that does this, Psalm 147, which we say every day, describes natural law, God's power in all kinds of expressions of nature. And it ends by talking about the fact that this same God gave law to Israel, meaning natural law and the divine law to Israel all come from the same lawgiver, and they're all part of the same universe. And one is the responsibility of God to take care of, and the other is our responsibility. So going back to Rabbi Siegel, partnership, that's the relationship between God and humans. And this is it's a powerful statement. So that's why I included it. Okay, I will see you next week. And next
you want to tell us which psalm you want us to read before next week?
Right now, as soon as I pull my notes out. I will tell you to read Psalms 12 and 13. Psalms 12, they're both short. 12 and 13, because you'll see they are connected.
You have been listening to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. If you enjoy these podcasts, we invite you to write a review on the Apple Podcast site or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information about Temple Beth Am Los Angeles, go to tbala.org.